Resign. My next guest is Danny Cohen. He's a former BBC executive. Now he's a columnist at the Telegraph. Telegraph, of course, being the newspaper that has exposed the secret of internal memo by the whistleblower Michael Prescott, which basically, told us how we'd seen that Panorama documentary spliced together two excerpts of Donald Trump's speech on January the 6th, 2021, the day of the Capitol riots, where 54 minutes apart, to make it appear that he had actually, basically urged his followers to actually go and use violence at the Capitol. Of course, many other egregious examples given by Michael Prescott in that report as well. We've lost the Director General of the BBC, Davie. We've lost the Head of News, Deborah Turness. We've now got a statement from the BBC Chair, Samir Shah, apologising for, he says, the error of judgment over the editing and accepting that the way the speech was edited did give the impression of a direct call for violent action. But is that going to be enough? Danny Cohen, what do you make of, well, both the resignations but also the apology by the BBC chair? Is that going to be enough and we all can all move on with our lives?
Well, I think it's right that Tim Davie and Deborah Turness resigned and they've taken accountability. The Prescott report, I think, is a pretty devastating report, and I'd encourage all of your viewers and listeners to read it. It's 20 pages, which outlines not just the issue around the manipulated Trump video, but wider issues with the American election coverage, really significant issues around BBC Arabic and the presentation of Israel, and also other topics like gender ideology. It's very significant. We're starting to see people claim this is a kind of right-wing coup.
Yeah.
It's nothing of the sort. It's an attempt in the best interest of the BBC to hold it to account and to live up to its values. And I think that's what we've been trying to do. I have not had a lot of chance to look at Mr. Shah's letter, but I do note it does acknowledge and refer to underlying problems. And I think that's quite significant. He doesn't go into, he makes a defence of the BBC, as he's naturally bound to, but he does refer to underlying problems. And it would be good to understand from him what exactly he's referring to there, because he doesn't just say it's individual errors, he talks about underlying problems. Yeah. So I think there's a hint there that Mr. Shah recognises there's a bigger picture here.
Well, this is it. And to me, the fact that we've got these two senior figures who've gone ostensibly because of this doctoring of this speech by Donald Trump, that's kind of the least of their offences, the least egregious of the crimes of the BBC. And I do think that some of this, some of the things that they have done over recent years have been morally outrageous and I would say dangerous in terms of feeding certain viewpoints, particularly anti-Semitism in this country and abroad as well, with BBC Arabic. And it's something you've been commenting on very openly since October the 7th, those attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians, is the BBC's outrageous coverage. My husband says, I go through a variety of media in the morning to get all the different, again, I like to hear all the different viewpoints. And he says, you only listen to Radio 4, so you've got to rile you up, so you're just shouting at it all morning. But some of the coverage on the website, the coverage, again, twice a week, in the report, twice a week they're having to correct reports. The outrageous taking of everything that Hamas says as just gospel truth, which is quite extraordinary. The incredibly biased reporting of this war opposed to any other war in terms of civilian deaths and the like. That is a far more dangerous and significant breach of BBC impartiality than this one speech, isn't it?
I agree with you. I agree, Julia. I think from a Jewish community perspective, the BBC and Mr. Shah actually owes the Jewish community an apology today. And I've got a very specific reason for saying that. The Prescott report shows that the BBC and its executives were in receipt of a report which showed detailed systemic bias at BBC Arabic. Yet in public, in Parliament, in private communications and meetings with members of the Jewish community, they have always denied that. And they've said it's a number of, a few bad apples, and they've dealt with it.
A few odd mistakes, isn't it? Can I just clarify for people who've not read the full Michael Prescott report, which most people will not have done, is that, and the stuff that's been detailed, David Collier has been a brilliant finder of truth on this, but we're not talking about just sort of slight different use of language. Do they call Hamas terrorists or not? We are talking about not even just hiring, the son of a Hamas official to front a documentary, but just blatant, outrageous use of basically Hamas spokespeople to all intents and purposes as supposedly independent journalists putting their case.
Correct. Some of whom have said horrific things about Jewish people, said things like, what should happen to Jewish people is what Hitler did, celebrated the October the 7th massacre and all those kinds of things. So I feel very strongly that the fact that they had evidence of this, but they weren't straight with the Jewish community about it, is pure gaslighting, Julia. It's presenting a reality which they know not to be true. And they did that to Jewish community over the last 2 years.
But they talk about, you know, mistakes, errors of judgment, and things like that. These aren't like, even, you know, splicing the documentary. It's about splicing the speech together for the Panorama documentary. Choosing to have somebody who, presenting a documentary or interviewed, who the cursory check of their social media will show that on October the 7th,
yes,
they were celebrating the murder and rape of Jews. Now, I mean, that's not an error of judgment, is it, or a mistake?
No, it's not. It's not.
So what does it tell us?
By the way, one of the things the Prescott report shows is that 2 of those reporters, one of them appeared 500 plus times on BBC Arabic. The other one appeared over 200 times on the service. So this is not people who are kind of eyewitnesses. These were people they were using on an almost daily basis to report on the war, who were clearly biased. And that is not within the values that we all expect of the BBC.
So what is it then? Because we've had Deborah Turness, she turned up at the BBC today, hopefully to clear her desk. Bye-bye, good riddance, I'd say. And she's saying there is no institutional bias at the BBC, whether that's about Trump or anything else. There's no institutional bias at the BBC.
I think that BBC is, you know, it shows a culture of denial. I think this is actually a really big opportunity for the BBC, because if the BBC can look this evidence in the face, and it can recognise that it has some issues with groupthink and systemic bias and institutional bias, then actually it can make itself fit for the future. If it continues to keep its head in the sand and keep pretending there are no issues, then I'm afraid the BBC is going to have a rougher and rougher time.
And this is it, because Nick Robinson on the BBC this morning did a long sort of, you know, monologue, and he's written some tweets and made some comments in the last few days, basically saying, look, there are conspiracies against us internally and externally. But I was arguing, a couple of hours ago on the show that actually the only enemies of the BBC that really count and are really doing the damage are those within the BBC who are committing these egregious crimes against journalism, and B, covering them up, and C, denying they're even happening.
Yeah, listen, I agree. And I think journalists like Mr. Robinson need to be careful about impartiality. They're commenting on this story and they're the subject of the story.
And I've got a lot of time for that. I think Nick was probably the best, one of the best BBC political editors we had.
Yeah.
I think he's a brilliant presenter. I genuinely like him as a person. But the problem is that he, like so many of us, they are just caught up completely in this bubble where they don't even know what they're doing.
That's right. They can't see it.
Why not?
I don't know, and I can't understand how you couldn't read the Prescott report and think, okay, we've got some issues here. Let's be open and address them. And yet they
do. And again, it's not just the Trump speech. It's not just Gaza. It's trans. I mean, literally obsessed with drag queens. Literally obsessed. Brexit. Let's face it. We all knew which side they were on. We know when there's a conversation about tax and welfare, we know what side they're on. Immigration. We know what side they're on. Climate change. I know the BBC's views on everything. And yet I shouldn't know that the BBC shouldn't have a view on anything.
No, you should know. You should know, because you should feel that both sides are fairly represented.
How do we get back to that? Do we need? I mean, look, the Director General isn't going to make a difference, is it?
I think it needs a really open, long-term dialogue within the BBC, within BBC News, and try and make people understand that for the sake of the BBC, we need them to be more open and to break out of this groupthink.
Do you think they can do that? See, I don't think you need a dialogue. I think people need to be told, you need to stop doing this or you're sacked.
Yeah, I agree. Only time will tell, and we need strong leadership. Forgive me, I must go.
I know, I've just realised I was only supposed to keep it till 40. I do apologise. Danny Cohen, come back on again. Great to hear from you.